Hello, I'm here again. Why am I here again? Because Blizzard pushed out build 36086 in the beta, and there is a bunch of class changes in this new build. Specifically about covenants, most of them, and quite a few conduit changes, as well as rebalances of certain abilities. Let's see if some of the abilities I called to be nerfed and to be changed have actually been fixed or not. And let's just start immediately with Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter has received one primary change around one of their conduits, Demon's Touch, which used to increase the damage of all your other abilities by 3%. It was a very boring and static passive. It did help with your scaling. The more renown you had, the more percentage you were able to level up with this conduit. Now it has been changed to something slightly more interesting. Relentless Onslaught. Relentless Onslaught now is going to give your Chaos Strike a 5% chance to trigger a second Chaos Strike. Why is this relevant? Well, it's not relevant for damage because Chaos Strike is shit. It's not relevant for Fury generation either because Demon Hunter doesn't suffer from Fury generation. And most of the Fury you're going to be spending is in Chaos Strike anyways, which is, back to point one, shit damage. The reason why this is relevant is because you can take the talent Cycle of Hatred. When Chaos Strike refunds Fury, it also reduces the cooldown of I-Beam. When you take the conduit that can give you a double strike of Chaos Strike, you can also get a double proc on the refund of Chaos Strike. This means extra cooldown reduction on I-Beam. Now that is something you want to spend Fury on. I-Beam, not Chaos Strike. So this is a interesting conduit to help you with extra damage with extra uptime on your I-Beam. It is still worth remembering that Chaos Strike has been nerfed in its scaling for Demon Hunters. Remember when Chaos Strike chance to refund Fury was tied to your crit value? It has since then been nerfed to be a flat chance, so this is not going to scale too well deep into the expansion since the chance is not going to increase in any way. But this Covenant is still going to help you, give you a higher uptime on I-Beam, especially because with more haste, faster GCDs, more Fury generation, you will get to cast more Chaos Strikes, which is going to mean more refund on your I-Beam cooldown. So it's still going to be fine for scaling, but it's definitely not going to be as strong as if Chaos Strike had a refund chance based on your crit. It's still a positive change though. Then moving on to Death Knight. Death Knight has received two major changes regarding their Covenant. One is Abomination Limb. Abomination Limb has gotten about 10% extra damage on their scaling from 22 to 25%, but it was hit by target cap. Now it only hits 5 enemies max. The crucial change here is that now pulling in on your first enemy is going to grant you a buff. For Blood is going to be Bone Shield charges, for Frost is going to be Rime, and for Unholy is going to be Runic Corruption. This is a rather minor change since Abomination Limb is on a 2-minute cooldown. You can at the very least guarantee yourself a minor buff whenever you use it. I still don't think it's very strong. As a Covenant for DK, it's at least behind 2 of them, and possibly 3 of them, making it the worst one anyways, because DK also has gotten a change on Shackle the Unworthy. Shackle the Unworthy has been buffed by nearly 20% in damage. It is now over 200% attack power scaling. It's also attack power scaling that does arcane damage, meaning it's going to bypass armor as a DOT. Before, you could reduce the cooldown of the ability by 4 seconds per rune spent, so pooling your runes allowed you to use this ability almost back to back. Now though it has been changed. Now you no longer get cooldown reduction, but you can spend runes to have a 50% chance to spread Shackle the Unworthy to a nearby enemy. Now 200% scaling on the DOT is pretty significant. To give you some comparison, 200% scaling is as good as Samphire and Moonfire put together on the same target. It's stronger than Rapture. It's like 2 Garrotes on top of each other, so it's not minor as a DOT. It's also magic, as I mentioned, so it bypasses armor, it has a 1-minute cooldown, and it can spread in AoE situations. So this could be much stronger than its original iteration. Now moving on to Druid, in a move that surprised absolutely nobody. The Guardian Druid new legendary has been nerfed. I really like this legendary, I think it's great. It helps Guardian Druid a lot. Remember, Guardian Druid is in that position where they cannot really fend for themselves. They don't have a lot of self-healing. They were supposed to have a lot of self-healing, but Frenzied Regeneration is the worst self-heal of all tanks. 24% of your max HP is a joke. It's beaten out in self-regen by DKs, by Paladins, by Demon Hunters, and now I am confident in saying even beaten by Brewmaster Monks. With their new Expel Harm and their new Guard, Celestial Brew system, they are shit at regen, so this legendary helped them a lot, but this nerf was still necessary. Especially because I don't like having borrowed powers doing all of your work. They should cook this legendary into your trash, passive as a talent maybe, but not as a legendary. So getting a nerf is still necessary since it was so strong in Mythic Plus, with pulls on multiple enemies. Ravenous Frenzy has also gotten nerfed, 5 seconds shorter duration. I don't think this was as necessary compared to nerfing Convoke the Spirits, so I will pass judgment on this one. Then you have another more important but subtle change that I will include anyways. Restoration Druid has gotten its Sunfire damage bonus modifier removed. Just as I release the healer video mentioning that Rest Druids that now don't even need to go Feral Affinity if they want to do damage, now Balance Affinity is also viable for their damage. Now they are getting a nerf on their Sunfire damage. Both the initial damage and the DOT damage of Sunfire has lost its plus 31% increased damage modifier value. This is quite relevant for damage because it was very easy in a Mythic Plus pool, even before you went into cut form, to just use one GCD to spread the Sunfire and start the damage going. So this is relevant damage nerf. Now, disengaging over to Hunter, I mentioned how that Chakram was probably the most boring of the Covenants, but also the most numerically strong. Well, now it got its damage cut in half, from 50% scaling to 25% scaling. The poor Soulforge Embers legendary, already nerfed by like 700%, now it's even target capped, so it's even worse. But the real change that makes me happy, is Chimera Shot. Remember how in every single video regarding range DPS, I bit down on Hunter for being overtuned and overpowered in the beta, how I put them in C tier when it came to rating, and plenty of people seemed triggered that Hunter should have been S tier or even A tier just because of their damage, but it was clear they were overtuned, and now Chimera Shot took a hit. The first hit of Chimera Shot went from 80% attack power to 65%, which is an okay nerf, but not that big. The real big hit is on their second hit. Their second hit, instead of doing 65% just like the first one in the same amount of nerf, now it's doing a tiny little cute 0.5 extra modifier to it. That's half the damage of your first shot. Both hits were nerfed down from 80 to 65, but the second hit now also does half of that. So that's a pretty big nerf to Chimera Shot. And I don't even know if this is actually enough of a nerf to Marksmanship. I still think something like Volley should get a hit as well, but we'll have to see. Now on to Mage. Plenty of changes for Mage. As I mentioned, all of the 3 specs are really disappointing right now, either because they play badly, or because they are clunky to play, or because they are behind in gearing and scaling and they feel slow to play. So what's the plethora of changes they have received? Okay, on to Monk. Helpful little change for Mistweaver Monk with Feline Stomp. Feline Stomp now also has a healing component to the instant ability. Before it used to do just 91% attack power damage, now it also does 91% spell power healing. 91% is not much, it's not big, but at least it does something for a healer, right? And then we continue the tradition of Monk changes being plentiful and great. Okay, it's a typo, never mind. And now we move over to the Great Wall of Priest. As usual, Priest is a fucking diva, an attention whore who wants all the news for himself, and in this bunch of changes they are the ones that receive the most. So, on to the modifiers. As you can see, the modifiers here are all over the place, from minus 32% to 0, so essentially all of the abilities increased by a third for all specs. You have then extra modifiers, you have them for Discipline Priest, for Shadow Word Death, Shadow Word Pain, Mind Blast and Mind Seer. You have them for Holy as well. Shadow Word Death and Shadow Word Pain all increase heavily in their core values. Most of the ability have gotten a scaling nerf. So their base damage has been increased, but for example, if you look at Mind Blast, from 144 per power scaling to 97. Shadow Crash, 125%, 85%. Void Bolt, 100%, 81%. So most of their abilities have gotten their base damage increase, but their scaling damage has been nerfed. What this means usually is that it's gonna be weaker for you to scale in the expansion, because of course you will scale with less damage from your spell power, because it's gonna be lower. Your base damage will be higher, likely at the start of the expansion, but it will not scale as hard later on. We will have to see, maybe not, since not all abilities have been hit by this rework. But the beta is down right now, I have no idea what these changes will amount to, we have to wait and see. Other changes for Priest, we have their Kyrian Covenant being reworked. It was expected due to the strength, not just of Ascended Blast, but obviously of their final big Nova AoE. Ascended Blast was murdered from 260% spell power scaling to 180%, with the healing slightly increased, but the problem wasn't the healing, the problem was the Discipline Priests using this to do mega damage, and because they have Atonement, they were also doing mega healing. And then the Boon of the Ascended went from 352% spell power scaling to 210% spell power scaling, and then from 222 to 159. This was inevitable. Another one I mentioned being broken was the Shadow Flame Prism Legendary, the legendary that allowed you to use your Mindbender as a broken AoE machine gun tool of death. Now the scaling went from 0.6 to 0.4. I still think it's very strong. Very strong. Not just because of the damage, but because of the 1.5 second extension whenever you use Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death with your Mindbender out. It's still a very solid legendary. And I'm saying this with absolutely zero proof, as the beta is down and nobody can try this yet, but trust me. Other thing mentioned a while ago, Blizzard was going to remove Legacy of the Void for a new single target focused talent, is what they said. What is the single target focused talent? The single target focused talent is Hungering Void. Your second Void Bolt cast on the same target will deal 25% more damage, cause the target to receive 15% more damage from you, and extend the duration of Void Form by 1 second. If the Void Bolt crits, it's an extra second extension. Again, not very sure how strong this is going to be, but Legacy of the Void was kind of outdated. Legacy of the Void made sense when you had proper Void Form version back in BFA and even more back in Legion, but now it was kind of devalued, so I'm interested in trying this one out. And we are done with Priest. We have to move on now, finally. We are moving on to Rogue, who, as I mentioned in the previous news video, they got their terrible Slaughter Covenant change into Flagellation, but the new one is that Bone Spike, another one of the broken, overtuned, overpowered abilities for your Covenant, has now been severely changed in damage. Before, it used to deal 60% of your attack power bleed every 3 seconds. Now, it's going to do 30% attack power damage, instant, and then 10% bleed damage over 3 seconds. So the bleed went from 60% of your attack power to 10% of your attack power. Goodbye. Outlaw has gotten a scaling nerf. Between the Eyes used to increase your critical damage against the target by 20%. Now it is going to increase your critical strike chance by 20%. You don't need to have as high of an IQ as I have to realize that having critical chance is better at the start of the expansion, because you have very little of it, so it's going to help you a lot. But 1-2 tiers from now, when you will be reaching 40 to 50% crit on your own, you would much rather have wanted 20% more crit damage than critical chance. So this is going to help you at the start and not as much at the end. On to Shaman. Shaman has gotten most of their Covenants nerfed in terms of base damage. I'm not going to cover them all. It's roughly a 20 to 30% damage nerf and healing nerf on most of their Covenants. The main changes: Healing Wave has gotten a slight nerf, about 10% healing nerf. Now, in case you don't know about Shaman, remember that BFA's Healing Wave is currently this. Yeah. So, the fact that it went from 170% to 330% is what I mentioned in my healing video and in my previous healer video as well. The fact that Restoration Shaman had a much stronger single target output right now, simply due to how ridiculously highly scaling their abilities were. So this nerf is not that bad when it comes to the scaling, because 300% spell power on a single target ability is still extremely strong. Also, this is not a nerf in and of itself, is a shift of power. You lost 10% of your scaling on your healing wave. However, look at Riptide. Boom, from 97% spell power to 170% of your spell power. I mentioned one of the problems of Shaman was lacking some stronger single target instant abilities, and now you have 170% spell power instant on your Riptide. It's still not, a get out of jail free card. It's still not a super strong emergency ability, but it's certainly better than what it was before, which is an improvement. And to bask in the sadness of the newly awaited Covenant for Elemental. Elemental was stuck with a Fulmination-based Covenant for over a month after they removed Fulmination, and now they finally decided to add the new one, which is this pile of garbage. Not much to comment on this. Even if it was 100% chance to extend the duration, and the Renown was going to increase the Flame Shock duration rather than the chance, it would have still been mediocre. But this is shit. This is terrible. So let's move over because this is just garbage. Demonic portaling over to Warlock, we have a window on the life and death of Decimating Bolt. When Decimating Bolt first came into this world, it used to do 4 times 200% of spell power, then down to 50% of spell power, and now down to 30% of spell power. It used to come out with 250% more damage on your next Drain Soul, and then down to 200% next damage on your Drain Soul, and now finally 100% damage on your Drain Soul. Turns out, when Drain Soul increases the damage on execute range targets by 100%, stacking damage on top of it with this Covenant ability, given the fact that Affliction Warlock also has a legendary that can increase the damage of your Drain Soul by up to 75%, it makes it very difficult to balance it around. Not only that, but this is not broken for Destruction or Demonology, which begs into question what purpose does this line of balance changes serve, because you're balancing this ability around Drain Soul, but only one spec can use Drain Soul. The other two are getting fucked because you're trying to balance Drain Soul. You were better off simply removing Drain Soul, or simply changing the extra damage of Drain Soul, but not touching Destruction and Demonology. So not sure what to make of this. I don't like this style of changes too much. It's the same way with Chimera Shot for Hunter. Chimera Shot was gutted because Marksmanship added 2 OP, but then what about Beastmaster, who also used Chimera Shot as a talent? Who knows? Another change for Warlock, the only other major change, is Impending Catastrophe. The instant damage of Impending Catastrophe went from 100% spell power to 20%, so 1/5 down, and then 210% DOT to 105%, so cut in half. This is a pretty major nerf. If you are Affliction, you can look at this on the bright side, since you were picking this in Mythic Plus because you wanted the extra DOT to empower your Malefic Rapture. You didn't care too much about the strength of the DOT. However, it still hurts. It still remains one of the only 2 viable AoE covenants, so it's not gonna change that much, the priority. If you wanted to go for AoE, this was likely the best choice anyways, but it still sucks that it got nerfed. And lastly, we're gonna end with Warrior. Now, Condemned has gotten nerfed and buffed at the same time. Is this Schrodinger's Condemned? No, Fury has gotten its Condemned buffed, and Arms has gotten its Condemned nerfed. Condemned, by the way, is the Ventir Covenant, which changes your Execute into a different ability. I mean, into the same ability, just stronger. For Fury, the scaling went from 92% of spell power to 103. It's barely a 13% increase, but for Arms, it went from 120 and 135% double hit to 83 and 93. So pretty severe bump on the damage that Arms can do with Condemned. Then again, Execute is way more a crucial part of the rotation for Arms than it is for Fury, and it kind of did a little bit too much damage for Arms probably. Other changes for Warrior, another one of the expected nerfs, Misshap and Mirror, that used to give you party-wide spell reflection, now only gives it to your nearest ally, so that's dead. Likely only possibly used by raid tanks trying to give spell reflect to their fellow tank or off tank when they are trying to cheese some mechanics, but in other situations it's essentially unviable. And lastly, a few changes for Fury. The more important ones, Frauding Berserker has got its regeneration cut in half. Annoying, but it's still a decent talent. And ladies and gentlemen, this was it. These were all the major changes that Blizzard just pushed through in this new beta build. Most of the other changes were just typos, punctuations, commas, and some very minor changes in numbers here and there. Soulbind, Scaling with Renown moved around in numbers from 6% to 7% or 13% to 15%. Some other PvP talents I don't give a shit about. A slew of anima powers for Torghast, whatever. So the ones mentioned were just really the most important ones, the most crucial ones. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you're triggered by something. I mean, you will be triggered by something. People are always triggered by something. Don't let me know if you have been triggered, but rather tell me what has triggered you about these changes, or I suspect lack thereof. I'll see you soon, guys, with the DPS videos for choosing your main in Shadowlands. For now, goodbye.